In this video, I'm going to talk about testing for celiac disease and gluten intolerance. Now, the first thing that people get done is usually a blood test, and these are antibodies against tissue transglutaminase, or TTG. This is an enzyme found in intestines which breaks down protein, and the immune system attacks this enzyme and produces antibodies using the IgA pathway, which is part of our immune system. There's another blood test that can be done called endomysial antibodies, or EMA, but it's usually just the TTG that is done. Now, we have different immune pathways. We have the IgE system, which is traditionally true allergies like anaphylaxis, bee stings, peanuts, prawns. That's all the IgE pathway. But there's other pathways, also the IgA and the IgG pathway. And these are more delayed, they're more slow acting. And so they're more involved with food intolerances rather than true food allergies. Now, unfortunately, the TTG is not very specific. It's often negative. So people are told they don't have a problem with gluten, and so they can keep on eating bread. Now, this creates a problem because people are often, I don't feel well when I eat bread, but you're telling me it's not a problem. The next step is genetic testing. So a lot of people have had their DNA tested, and so they know their DNA profile for lots of common genes. And a common gene that's associated with celiac disease is what's called the HLA-DQ gene. So there's the HLA-DQ2 and the HLA-DQ8. Now, these are often, but not 100% associated with celiac disease. So again, you could be told that you don't have these genes and therefore you're not going to have celiac disease. And that may be true, but you still can have gluten intolerance. The next stage that people often go to is then having a gastroscopy, a tube and camera stuck down into their small intestine, and little biopsies taken, and the specialist has a look around, see if they can see any little raw areas or flat areas. So when you look at the lining of the gut under a microscope in the small intestine, there are lots of finger-like projections, so what we call little villi, and these are to increase the surface area of the small intestine and increase the absorption of nutrients as the food passes by. So it's a very, very useful way for our gut to absorb lots of nutrients like protein, fats and carbs, but also minerals and vitamins. So very, very important that it's functioning properly. And if you have celiac disease, you can often see a breakdown of these villi. So the lining of the small intestine gets inflamed and the little villi break down, and you just see this flat surface instead of villi. And if it's really bad, the specialist can actually see patches of red raw lining in the small intestine. So that's mostly with true celiac disease. Now, the lining of the small intestine is very, very fragile. We know that the villi can break down easily, but it's only one cell thick. And so it's easily broken down. So when you look at our skin is several layers of cells thick, and then it's got this stratified layer on top of dead skin it provides a very good protective barrier against bacteria and toxins getting into our body. But the lining of the intestine is very fragile. It's easily broken down, and so toxins can get in, foreign foods can get in, things that we're allergic to. So it's very important that this barrier is intact. It's only one cell thick, but it is waterproof, and it's held together with what we call tight junctions. So it's a bit like a picket fence, and in between the bars of the picket fence are these tight junctions that are waterproof. Now, these tight junctions can be broken down by a chemical called zonulin, which is part of a group called occludins. And gluten can do this, and possibly some other foods if you're allergic or intolerant to them. So high levels of zonulin floating about in your gut or in your bloodstream can indicate gluten intolerance and a breakdown of these tight junctions and what we call leaky gut, or the official term is intestinal permeability. In other words, the lining is permeable, it lets water through. And if it lets liquids flow, it can also let in toxins. And so this can be a way of stimulating like an autoimmune disease. So your immune system is overactive because the gut lining is not working properly. You've got leaky gut, toxins, food particles, things you might be allergic to are seeping into your bloodstream, going around your body and settling in places like joints. Your immune system then overreacts, becomes very active, starts reacting to all these different foods, toxins, and attacking your own body. So this is a mechanism through which autoimmune disease can start. And we're beginning to understand this more and more. So these tight junctions are vitally important. Now, zonulin actually is a very useful thing to have, because if you have a really bad gastro, so say you have like salmonella infection in your gut, lots of zonulin is made to actually break down the tight junctions and release fluid into the gut. So zonulin is not a bad thing to have. So when you have gastro, a lot of fluid is released from the bloodstream into the lumen of the gut, into the space inside the gut, so you can flush out the bad bacteria and the toxins. And that's why you get lots of watery diarrhea. It's getting rid of all that bad stuff. Okay, so zonulin does have a normal function, but you don't want it being there day to day, because that's when you get permanent leaky gut. And as I said, toxins, food particles and things can get into the bloodstream and cause problems. Okay, so that's leaky gut. That's the tight junctions are so important, and the zonulin should only be there to break down the tight junctions. If you have gastro, it shouldn't be there on a day-to-day basis. For most people, that's as far as testing goes. If people think that they're celiac disease or gluten intolerant, they go to the doctor. That's often what they get. They get the TTG blood test. Your family doctor might say, it's normal, no further testing needs done, you can eat as much bread as you want. So there's this disconnect between what you've been told and what your body is telling you. You might be lucky enough to have the gene test done, but again, if it's negative, you've been told, no, you don't have celiac disease, you don't have a problem. Also, you may have a gastroscopy and nothing is seen. And so, they don't see these raw areas, and on biopsy, your villi still look intact. Again, you will be told you don't have a problem with gluten. But I'm here to tell you, you can still have a problem with gluten when all those tests are normal. Now, luckily, there's a lot more testing available now, and I'm going to walk you through this new further testing that can be done that will really give you an idea of whether you have a problem with gluten or not. So you get much more information than just the basics. Now, first of all, I want to give you a little bit about my own story with gluten, because I'd been through all this testing and it was all negative. What happened was, when I was much younger, a sort of young adult, I used to get a lot of mouth ulcers all the time. I was continuously having ulcers on my tongue, on the roof of my mouth. I was also having a lot of cold sores on my lips, and they were so painful. I was in agony a lot of the time. I can remember it very clearly. So much pain. And you have to remember that the gut starts in the mouth. It doesn't start in your stomach. It starts right up here where you start putting food into your mouth. So when you get symptoms in your mouth, that can often be a sign that a similar thing is happening in your gut. So I was having these continuous, very painful ulcers, and they were so painful, I went to extreme lengths. I was taking painkillers, I was putting all sorts of, gels and things on, didn't work. I even went to the the extreme of burning these ulcers with a silver nitrate stick just to get rid of them. And that was extremely painful to do, but it actually worked a little bit because it burnt the ulcer and then they healed up really quickly. And even I took courses of steroid tablets. I was already using steroid gel, but on occasions I took steroid tablets. I was just in so much pain. But nobody could tell me what was going on. This is like in the 80s, so nobody had any idea about gluten intolerance apart from really severe celiac disease. Then things got worse. So what happened was I started getting pins and needles in my hands and my feet. And so I had all this tingling, and then I started to get spasms in my hands. So when I woke up in the morning, my hands were sort of folded like claws. They were really stiff and I couldn't open them. It was just so stiff. I eventually saw a neurologist friend of mine, and he said, did some blood tests. He said, you've got B12 deficiency. So for a young person, and I had quite severe B12 deficiency, it was affecting my nerves. And so I was getting these pins and needles, and also I was getting the spasm in the muscles. So some B12 injections fixed that problem, went away, but still the mouth ulcers continued. I had vague tummy pains. My tummy was always a bit easily upset. Occasional like IBS symptoms, so a bit of bloating, occasional diarrhea and things. So, but nothing severe, just sort of grumbled on. And then I went to Indonesia for a holiday. So I went backpacking across Java, which was a great holiday. It was so exciting, so much fun. And because it's just one volcano after the other all the way across Java. So fantastic place to visit, fantastic culture. People don't eat a lot of bread there. They eat rice and they don't eat much dairy either. So for that whole month, I didn't have dairy and I didn't have bread. I was just eating delicious foods like nasi goreng and chicken and peanut, kebabs and things. So much delicious food. I didn't even miss the bread and the dairy. And then when I got back, I realised I hadn't had a mouth ulcer the whole time I was away. So then the penny dropped. It clicked. I thought, right, I must be gluten intolerant. And so I started going off bread. Now, of course, I'd had the TTG was negative. The gene tests were negative. So people were telling me, you don't have the HLA-DQ2 or 8, so you can't have celiac disease. And this was despite the fact that at the same time, several members of my family were having the same problem. They were having gluten intolerance and going off gluten. And I was living in a different country to them, so I didn't hear until like a year later that my sister had B12 deficiency at the same time, and she had gone off gluten, and then her daughter also. So several family members had a problem with gluten. What is the problem? What's going on now that so many people are having problems with gluten? Well, it's not true celiac disease as such, but what's happened is modern wheat is genetically modified and it's very high in gluten, so a lot of people just can't tolerate it. It's very foreign to our body. Our bodies don't know how to break it down. And then there's also the herbicide glyphosate, which there's also a link between that and gluten intolerance. So glyphosate disrupts the gut microbiome and potentially impairs the immune system's ability to handle gluten. So we start overreacting to it. Now, the other thing that's happening is if you look at traditional wheat, which has been grown all over the world in the past, it's been what we call tall wheat or soft wheat. So you see these wheat fields with long, tall wheat that's soft, it blows in the wind, it's very nice to look at. And that is much lower in gluten, is traditional, and it's used still in Eastern Europe. So many people when they go to Eastern Europe, so they go to Italy and also places like Romania and Hungary, they find they can tolerate wheat because they're still using those old-fashioned wheat varieties. They're this tall, soft wheat that is lower in gluten. So you don't see sliced bread and sandwiches so much in those cultures. You might see a rougher bread that you can make big rolls with, but you can't make sliced bread with. But our desire in the West for sliced bread and sandwiches and toast means that a lot of the wheat that's grown in Western Europe and the UK and America and Australia is what we call dwarf wheat. It's a much shorter wheat, and it's full of hard wheat, so it's got a lot of gluten in it. It's very hard, and unfortunately more people react to this because of the gluten and also because it's genetically modified. It's often grown in places that are not very fertile, in massive farms, and so there's a lot of pesticides and fertilizers and things that get rid of mold. So there's a lot of spraying goes on, and probably lots of glyphosate as well. So you can see how we've gone from eating a food which was a problem for probably very few people. True celiac disease isn't that common. It's common in some countries, so it's a bit more common in Ireland because there's more genetic concentration of those genes. Generally speaking, true celiac disease is not that common. But what's happening is more and more people are getting gluten intolerance through these delayed IgA and IgG pathways, immune pathways. That's my story. And when I look back as a child, I didn't actually like bread. I didn't eat very much of it. I can remember when I was like 8, or mother and my aunts and my granny and all say, come on, eat more bread, you've got to eat more food to build you up and grow. And in fact, I think what happens with people who are gluten intolerant and they're eating a lot of wheat is they actually are shorter. So there is research to show that people who are intolerant to grains, and since we started farming, about 12,000 years ago, people got a lot shorter when they started eating grains, so not so tall. And so when I look at people out in the street or busy places, I'm looking at people and thinking, I bet they have a problem with gluten, just by the way they look. They look inflamed, they may be struggling with their weight. There's all sorts of health issues that, after a while you can just tell. I can look at somebody and go, I think this is what their problem is with their health. So that was me. I didn't eat much bread, and we always used to have oat porridge in the winter every morning before school. So my mother was cooking us beautiful fresh porridge. So there was no ready-made porridge in those days. It had to be soaked and then cooked fresh in the morning with salt, and then we'd have cream and a bit of jam or some fruit on the top. It was a really delicious traditional Scottish and Irish breakfast. But for some reason it used to give me aches in my tummy. I used to have this ache when I ate oats, like it was like a sadness. It was a really weird ache in my solar plexus, and I'm going to come back to that later on in this video. The signs were there early on, but it didn't really come to fruition until I was in my 20s. And also, the wheat was changing in the 80s. There was lots of genetically modified foods were just coming in, glyphosate, all these things were changing in our traditional diet. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the testing that we can do now, and I'm going to talk about my results and show you how doing more testing can actually help you as well determine what's going on with your body. So keep listening. Now, the first test I want to show you here is, these are antibody tests. And you can see that there's 6 antibody tests on this sheet. So it's a little bit more detailed than the TTG, which is what you'd normally get done with your family doctor or GP. The first 2 are the tissue transglutaminase with IgA and also IgG. And you can see with my results, those antibody levels were normal. Whenever I was tested initially, I didn't have antibodies to the TTG, and so I was told no problem with gluten. But then when you go down, you see the deaminated gliadin peptides. Now, a peptide is just a protein that's been broken down into shorter chains. It's in between a protein and an amino acid. So an amino acid is just one of the molecules on its own. A peptide is a chain, maybe 10 or 20 amino acids still joined together. Deaminated gliadin peptide, IgA, still no reaction, but then deaminated gliadin peptide, IgG, you can see there is a positive reaction to this. Now, this test was done very recently, and I have been gluten-free for a number of years now. I ate gluten for 2 weeks before this test, and I ate a little bit of oats and rye and all the different grains before I did this testing. I don't think this reflects possibly what would happen if I was eating gluten all the time. You really need to do these tests before you give up gluten, because you may have negative results, but you still have a gluten problem. So I would recommend that you eat bread for about 3 months before you do the testing, unfortunately. The time to do this testing is when you first think there's a problem, before you give it up. Okay, I've got some antibodies to the breakdown products of the gliadin. And the gliadin, if you remember from the previous video, is the type of gluten that you get in wheat. Now, there are some people who say that these tests are not significant and that are not diagnostic of celiac disease. But I think the fact that I have got some antibodies to these shows that my immune system is reacting to these breakdown products of gluten in wheat. And I've also got some antibodies to gliadin, so the very specific protein that makes up the gluten in wheat. So I've got a small amount of IgA and IgG in these tests. So this is a warning sign. And if you look at the algorithm that's down below, it says possible celiac disease. There is something going on. It's not very severe because I've been on a gluten-free diet now for a number of years. This is great because it gives you more information than just the TTG, and it gives you more in depth. So this is the testing I would recommend now if you really want to know if you're gluten intolerant or not. Now, of course, you can just give up gluten and, assume that you are intolerant to it. But some people like to know definitively, and sometimes people know that they feel better on gluten, but then they don't do the diet very strictly, and that can cause problems because you can have chronic leaky gut then. When you do testing like this, it's much more motivating then to do a gluten-free diet properly, when you can actually see in colour that you're making antibodies and it's causing a problem for your immune system. Let's move on to the next test, and this is a gut barrier panel. These are quite new, to be able to do these tests. It's very recent that these sort of tests have become available. They are a bit expensive, but it is so useful to be able to define exactly what's going on. You can see down the left here that there is candida, which is a common problem in the gut, zonulin, occludens, and LPS. You can see the first column is IgG 1 to 4 and C3D. So this lab have decided that by combining these two tests, C3 is an immune complex, part of our complement system, and IgG is our antibody system that we know reacts in delayed, like food intolerances. And then in the other column, we've got IgA 1 to 2. This is putting together 3 different parts of our immune system, combining in the one result. This is excellent because it's giving us, again, more detail about what exactly our immune system is doing. So we look at the first column, the candida is negative, but the zonulin is highly positive. So that means I have got a lot of zonulin in my bloodstream. Now, the interesting thing is that I've had my gut biome tested several times, and they always test for zonulin in the gut, and it's always been negative. It's always been normal. No zonulin seen. But here is now evidence that I have a lot of zonulin in the bloodstream. So I've got leaky gut, and it's most likely caused by gluten. And then occludin, which is the sort of term for other zonulin-like chemicals, is negative, which is great. And then LPS. So LPS are lipopolysaccharides. They're a major structural component of the outer membrane of some gram-negative bacteria. In other words, If you've got elevated LPS or lipopolysaccharides, that would indicate that I've got leaky gut and that there's some bacteria in my gut that shouldn't be there, and the LPS from those bacteria are leaking into my bloodstream. This is a blood test, okay? This means that even though when I looked for these things on the stool test to do my gut biome, they weren't there. They're actually going into the bloodstream and creating inflammation and activating my immune system. Okay, so we've got two things there that indicate that I've got leaky gut, the zonulin and the LPS. And then when you look at the IgA column, the only thing that's positive there is the candida. And I'm not surprised. Well, candida is normal in the gut. It's normal to have some candida. But what happens is if you have a problem in your gut and you have abnormal bacteria growing there or a lack of good bacteria, then candida can take over. It can start growing and then it becomes a real problem. And it can give you sugar cravings, affect your hormones, your brain, and induce you to eating sugar because that's the fuel that candida loves. Now, I want to go on to the final testing of the suite of tests that I've done. This test was quite expensive. It's about $300 US. I had this done in Australia, but with a lab overseas. And this is measuring IgG to specific foods. Now, you can get this measured in a lot of countries. IgG testing for food allergies has been around for quite a number of years, but now the testing has been refined, and very often now they combine IgG and IgA. You can react to certain foods using the IgG pathway, and then you can react to other foods using the IgA pathway. So if you don't do both, you might miss some of the foods that you're intolerant to. These are my results, and I want to go through the results and use them as a way to show you what can be done for yourself and how you can get more evidence to see what foods are causing a problem for you. So if we look at the grains first, now green is okay, the pale blue is kind of slightly elevated, mild reaction, yellow is moderate, orange is high, and then red is severe reaction. And when we look at all the grains that I've been tested for, you can see I'm not really reacting a huge amount to wheat, spelt, sorghum, oats, rice. These are all pretty good. And buckwheat's okay. I'm reacting a little bit to millet, so that's something I need to be careful with in gluten-free products. But all the things that are in gluten-free products like sorghum, amaranth, and even quinoa and chia seeds, they're all fine, and hemp seeds are fine. So I'm good to go with the other grains, which is great news. Now, there is one caveat, and that is I don't eat those foods very much at all. I try to stay away from all grains just because of the way I react. I find I react to some gluten-free products, so particularly things like gluten-free pizzas that may have sorghum or millet in them, because things like tapioca and potato and rice, which are often in gluten-free products, are very soft, so you can't make a hard base or a base that sticks together. So they add things like millet and sorghum in there, and then my body reacts to them. So I just stay away from all of those things, and I feel so much better. I want to move on then from all the grains, and the thing that was most significant for me was dairy. And if you look at my dairy results, you can see I got a severe reaction to casein, to cow's milk, and also goat's milk, which is very unusual. Well, it's certainly something I haven't seen in myself before. But clearly I have a dairy allergy or intolerance as well. Now you can see I also have some reaction to whey protein and also eggs. But that's a mild reaction. And I think what that reflects is, so when you have something like leaky gut, as I said, these toxins are getting in, or the proteins from the foods are getting in, and your immune system starts reacting to those foods that you eat most commonly, and you start producing antibodies to them. Now, the good news is that your immune system can calm down, and also so these allergies can die away. So if you do it properly, you do elimination diet and rotation diets, you can actually get your immune system to calm down, and so that you can tolerate these foods again. Perhaps maybe in small amounts, but at least you don't have to give them up forever. I discovered that I had actually done an IgG food panel previously back in 2007, so that was nearly 20 years ago, but I'd forgotten about it completely. And when I look back now, if you look at these results, you can see at that stage I was reacting to barley and rye as well as wheat, but very strongly to cow's milk at that time, and also a little bit to eggs. But there was things that, I was reacting to onions, I was reacting to almonds, and I'm not reacting to those now. Those have healed up. But because I've continued to eat dairy, because I forgot about this, it's kept the immune system going in terms of this intolerance to cow's milk. So that was my bad for not paying attention to this. And now I have, come to terms with the fact that definitely dairy is not for me. Now, I've been eating a lot of goat's cheese recently, and that's been quite good, but clearly I'm making antibodies to goat's cheese. So what I hope is that I'm going to substitute sheep cheese now for a while, and I'm not going to eat cow's milk or goat's milk for a while. And I'm hoping that the antibodies to goat's milk will die down. It will calm down as I calm down my immune system. And so I'll be able to reintroduce goat's cheese and goat's milk at a later date. It doesn't mean forever, but I think in terms of the cow's milk and cheese, I think that is going to be forever, because that's twice now I've had a very high reaction to it. And also the whey protein. That's going to have to go, down the line when my immune system has calmed down and I'm not making these antibodies and my zonulin has come back to normal. I may be able to have small amounts of dairy, because it's really hard to avoid dairy when you're out. It's very hard to avoid wheat when you're out. And so eating out can be a real struggle. And other members of my family have a bit of a problem with dairy as well. So I think that's probably something genetic that runs through our family. Again, dairy is not the food it used to be. Cows are intensively reared, they're intensively milked, they're given antibiotics all the time because they get inflamed, they get mastitis. They're fed sugar and strange foods to make them produce milk all year round, which is not normal for them. So you can see how the way that we grow food and the way that food is presented to us to buy and eat is responsible for a lot of these problems. And so we've got to go back to basics. We've got to go back to eating fresh food that's not processed in large factories like wheat and dairy is, and eating foods that our bodies can tolerate. Doing this testing is really, really useful. It's really, really helped me to understand what's going on in my body. Now, you can see also from the other testing that I'm also intolerant to coconut, and I think that reflects that I ate a lot of coconut oil. And so again, I'm hoping that that will calm down once I get all this under control. And I'm also intolerant to Brazil nuts, which I have eaten a lot of in the past. This testing has given me a lot more information to go on and how to adjust my diet to settle down this immune reaction and heal up the leaky gut. Now, one of the things that, remember we talked earlier, or I mentioned earlier about oats being a problem. One of the things I've noticed with gluten intolerance and with the oats is that it can affect my mood quite severely. And the reason for this is because of serotonin. So serotonin, about 90% of it is made in the gut. Serotonin is our happy hormone. Most of us know about it because low levels can lead to depression and anxiety and panic attacks. And so antidepressants are all about raising your serotonin levels. And I often treat depression and anxiety by raising people's serotonin levels with supplements. looking from the front end, antidepressants tend to work from the back end by stopping the breakdown of the serotonin you're making, but I work from the front end because I believe that a lot of people have problems making serotonin because they have gut problems. Their serotonin is low because of their gut, and so this is why antidepressants often don't work, because you're just not making enough serotonin for the antidepressants to have an effect. I have noticed that eating a lot of gluten will actually turn off the chromaffin cells in the lining of the gut that make serotonin. So I can give myself a really bad depression by eating a big wheat pizza, like on a Friday night. We used to have pizza night, was Friday night with our family, pizza and ice cream. And I would spend all day Saturday and Sunday feeling terrible, tired, depressed for no reason, no motivation to do anything. And I was just like, what is wrong with me? I should be enjoying the weekend. And what I was doing was lying in bed, feeling terrible. So when I went gluten-free, I noticed this didn't happen anymore. I didn't get this depression. And if I go off, so if I have a moment of weakness and I have pizza or something like that, then I know I'm going to have a bit of depression for a few days. So I know that it'll pass, it'll get better as my serotonin comes back online again. So I know I just have to go through it. There's nothing really wrong with me. It's just that my serotonin levels have just dropped really low. Now you see this also with things like alcohols that have wheat in them. So gin is traditionally made with wheat, and we know it has a reputation for giving people depression with their hangovers. And so it's a real thing. It's a reason for that. It turns off your serotonin production. And also with other grain alcohols like whiskey and rye. There is some people who think that could be behind some addictions to alcohol, that you feel really down because your serotonin's been turned off. So the only thing that make you feel better is to have more whiskey or rye. And it does help for a little while, but then you go back into the depression, you feel even worse. So it's not really a solution, but you can see how that could happen, because you do get a little bit of a high from eating wheat. Wheat and the other grains have these natural chemicals in them that act like cannabis. So it does give you a little bit of a high when you eat these foods, but then when you're coming down off them, you feel terrible. And eating more bread or pizza or whatever will boost you up again with the cannabinoids, but then you're going to feel down again. And so you get into this cycle of mood swings. You could be irritable, depressed, anxious, and gluten is behind a lot of these problems. What do you do? Well, I recommend my patients that they remove all the grains, just get them all out, and also the sources of alcohol that have grains in them. I'll then go through a protocol to heal up the leaky gut, and then also calming down the immune system. That's really, really important. And then rotate foods with a positive reaction after that. And then gradually you can reintroduce some of the grains that you're not reacting to, and just over a period of time, so not all at once. You can start afresh and see if your immune system reacts or not. But now with all this new testing, it's going to be so much easier to identify what foods people are having problems with. Do you have leaky gut? Do you have high zonulin or occludens? What exactly is going on? Because information is power, isn't it? Once you know what's going on in your gut, you know what foods you have to avoid. Like I know I've got to avoid dairy as well as the grains. It's going to be a bit hard, but it's doable. And I'm really motivated now. Since I've given up dairy, I've lost about 5 kilos. I feel much better. It's really well worth looking at these things, getting the definitive answer, and then working with that. Now, in terms of giving up the grains, I think it's really important, because in the previous video we talked about that all the grains have some protein in them, and even things that are labelled as gluten-free. The true grains, or cereals as they used to be called, are the seeds of grasses. So there's a certain group called the Poaceae family, which has wheat, barley, oats, corn and sorghum in it. And then there's the pseudo cereals. And that's quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth, and chia seeds. So chia seeds are seeds of a different kind of plant. They're not grasses. You could be told that you can eat some of these foods which are not part of the seeds of grasses. So things like quinoa and sorghum, very often is told they're gluten-free, but they still have protein in them. And I see a lot of people who are intolerant to gluten, and they're also intolerant to quinoa as well. It's easier just to take them all out, let your immune system calm down, and then start reintroducing them again. The things that I think are safe are chia seeds and buckwheat, because buckwheat, it's not really named correctly. It's not a wheat. It's not even a grass. So I think those two are pretty safe. So whenever you see gluten-free products, they're often gliadin-free, which is the wheat gluten, but they're not truly gluten-free. All of these cereals and pseudo-cereals have protein in them, to which you can develop an allergic or immune reaction. Be very careful when you're reading labels. Be suspicious about things that are labelled gluten-free. Read the labels, learn what all these things mean, learn the names. You know, if something doesn't sit well with your body, it's probably got some sort of grain in it that you're intolerant to. Do the basic testing, but don't be put off if you're told it's negative. Keep asking for further testing. I mentioned the tests that I have described and shown to you today. Ask for extended antibody tests for zonulin and occludins, and the IgG and IgA, the exclusion diet, do a gut healing protocol and a rotation diet. And that way you're going to get the gut healing, and very importantly, you're going to get rid of the leaky gut, which is responsible for so many health problems I see today. So it's not just IBS, but as I said, autoimmune diseases, thyroid problems, things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, what else? High blood pressure, heart disease. All these things are based on inflammation, on our immune system overreacting. And so by getting to grips with your gut health and healing all this up can affect all these problems positively. It can reduce the inflammation that's behind all of these inflammatory chronic diseases. And even, if you've children with health problems, lots of kids now are getting diabetes, lots of kids are getting gluten intolerance. And it's not just because they're eating bad foods, it's because the foods have changed. They've become so foreign to our bodies that our bodies don't recognise them and know how to deal with them and break them down easily. To finish off, I do have a programme that you can follow for gluten-free. It has eating plans, it has information about all the different grains, a gut healing protocol, all the things you need to get your health back on track. And if you sign up for this, then you have the opportunity to have a consult with me and also to do testing. We can have a consult from anywhere in the world. We can do a Zoom consult. So for people who have joined my program, I'm going to be offering so you can upgrade to the consult level. I think it's so important to talk to somebody who knows all of this information, who knows about the food state, who knows about elimination diets, who knows about the testing and has access to the testing. And also, from my own personal experience, I've been on this long journey and my health has really suffered because of it, and determined to get my health back on track now again and continue to be healthy well into my old age and to help other people. So I'm so passionate about getting this information out and helping people understand the difference between health information and marketing, which is everywhere. People are confused and unhappy. They're told you don't have a problem by practitioners who don't really know and don't really know what it's like. And I do. So I hope that I've helped you with this video, and I encourage you to go on to the next level. You can join the community and we can help each other. Thanks for listening, and just check down below for the links to my program.